Hey guys, Aaron Miles here with On Tilt Gaming. Going to be bringing you my top 10 cards of Return of the Dragon Emperor. Just a little disclaimer before we get into the list on how I kind of pick these cards. First off, I don't put rulers on the list. I find them kind of linear, a little subjective, hard to compare to cards that go in your main deck. And the second one is that while I do look at how these cards are going to impact Wanderer, Lapis Cluster Constructed, and what I believe to be New Frontiers going forward, I really mainly focus on how they impact the meta that they come out in. So with that being said, we're going to get into our first card, which is Erasure. It's a 4 cost Ancient Magic, 1 white, 1 black, 2 colorless, destroy target non-magic stone card. This card isn't particularly powerful, it's a little overcosted for most of the removal and Force Will, but I do find it very important to have a card in your game that just says destroy 1 card on the field. No matter how much mana it costs, it's just good for something like that to exist. But the fact that it's an Ancient Magic means that it could potentially be paid for 0 mana in Alhamat, so you get to slam down your win condition the same turn that you get to destroy one of their creatures or one of their additions. It's very important to have something like this exist. So that kind of really puts it in as this number 10 slot. There weren't a whole lot of great cards in the set, nothing super blew me away when I originally saw everything as I was looking over it to make this video, so I think Erasure is a very solid number 10 card to have on this kind of list. Going into number 9, we have Viola's Machinations. Now, this card seems a little underwhelming at first. Your opponent discards a card of their choice, and then you put a mana counter on your J-Ruler if it has mana. What this is extremely important for, as you look at the confines of our particular meta right now, is that if you're going second as Alhamat, you can Rune of Soul and Black Moonbeam Prisia all in one turn because you have your 2 mana counters for Rune of Soul if you called a white or black stone, which I'm assuming you're playing 10 black stones. Then you have your Energize and your 1 mana for Black Moonbeam. So you can't play Scorn or Nameless Mist on turn 1 because it's going to upset that kind of play, especially if they throw down an Elvish Priest or a Sacred Elf and a Levantine turn 1. What Viola's Machinations lets you do is you still get a card out of their hand because the raw card advantage is a little more important in this scenario than seeing what they get and not being able to rune Black Moonbeam. And then because it puts a mana counter on, you still have your Energize token and your 3 mana counters, so you can still Rune of Soul Black Moonbeam. And because of that, Viola's Machinations get the number 9 slot. Other black control decks, like if you want to play the Val 3, the Tyler list from Atlanta that got first place, if you're going to play something like that, I would still absolutely play Scorn or Nameless Mist over Machinations. But in this particular meta with this kind of control deck that we're seeing come out, I think Viola's Machinations is the card that you want for your 1-drop discard slot. Going into number 8, we have Riola, Alabaster Dragon Princess. While she's not a particularly overwhelming card for her first ability, reviving a Dragonoid, other Ancients and Dragonoids get +2/+2. Obviously very good for the Millium deck. Don't think we're going to be seeing that pop up anywhere in competitive. The big thing is that it allows you to heal your Astral Ruler, which for the most part means Val 2. And Val 2 was already playing White Stones anyway, so this is kind of a natural fit for that deck. Most Alhamat decks are only running 1 Black Moonbeam because they can search it with Rune of Soul. So you get Moonbeamed once in Val 2, and then you play Riola, you heal, and all of a sudden you're back on the board. Their 1 Moonbeam is gone. Most of them aren't playing Horn in the main because they play Blazer. They want to be able to recur that out of their own graveyard. So this is something that could potentially take your opponent by surprise. Even if they do play more than 1 Black Moonbeam, you're probably playing a couple copies of Riola in the main. You could even side additional copies. And just having the first card that says that we can heal our Astral Ruler has a lot of impact across all formats. This is very good for decks that really want to just sit on their J-Ruler, such as Gil Lapis 2.0. In Wanderer, we're talking about like Little Red. So I always had problems with decks that want to sit on their J-Ruler because they are kind of easy to remove. They're pretty susceptible to Black Moonbeam. Riola kind of gives you a second chance at that, and I think that's very powerful for Force of Will going forward for the next year and a half that this is legal. Number 7, we have Mariabella, the Machine Hearted. I think this card's really good. I side decked this card at the ARG this last weekend. I thought it was very, very good against control for the Prisia decks. So when she enters the field, you get to search your Magic Stone deck for a basic stone, put it into play. Usually you want to go red or green. Usually you want to go green against control, but going red if you're playing Prisia gives her swiftness automatically, which is pretty powerful. But for fire, when you put in a fire magic stone, you get a blast counter. When you put in a wind one, you get a breeze counter. Breeze counters are essentially wall of winds for spell chance. And the blast counters are deal 500 damage to a J Resonator. So it's very possible that you could even kill your opponent's Persia with this card. If you just turn 1 Sacred Elf, turn 2 like energize into this, get a red stone, attack with it, next turn call another stone, kind of thing. All of a sudden she has 1,000 damage built into her. That's going to kill pretty much any blocker. It's going to kill 2 blockers most of the time. And I just think this card's extremely versatile, very well-rounded, and can do a lot of things that you want to be doing against some of the worst matchups for red-green decks. Going into number 6, we have Magic Stone of Yvonne Home. I don't think I've ever looked at a top 10 list and been like, oh yeah, there should be a stone in here. Because for the most part, they're like, most stones are just dual stones. Like, if Scorched Bales came out, I wouldn't say that like, oh, this red-black stone is objectively better than a green-blue stone because of the meta we're in, because that changes all the time. However, this is the first Shock Rock, as we call them, that I think you really want to be playing over the original. For example, we saw Black-Blue Stealth come out, and they played the Black-Blue Shock Rock in decks that weren't Val 3, but that's because you needed 8 Black-Blue stones. Right now, we're seeing this card played over Scorched Bales. 300 life to exile the top card of your opponent's deck isn't that big of a cost. It gives you information. If they were, really hoping to draw something and it was there, it avoids you getting luck sacked. Generally, they're not going to like Hydromonica before you call a stone, so that's out of the question. But it does also help counter if your opponent is playing the green-blue Kaguya stone that lets them scry. They stack the best card at the top of their deck. You hit this, boom, completely countered. But it's just, this is the first time I've seen a stone be played over the dual counterpart, and I think that's really worth noting. I think this is the last time we're going to see something like this happen. As far as I know, we're not going to be getting any more stones in L4, so I just really kind of wanted to highlight that because I do think it's a big deal. And we have Blazer, Prisoner of Flame, taking up our number 5 slot. It's a Resonator that doesn't die. It goes to your graveyard, you can bring it back out. It has swiftness and flying. It's only 4 mana originally, and at the end of your turn you put a non-magic stone card from your opponent's removed area at the bottom of the deck if you don't banish this card. Not a big deal. Generally what you're going to be doing with this is recurring it from grave. You don't really care if it dies at the end of your turn because you're leaving your mana open because your control deck. You just bring it back at the end of your opponent's turn, or the start of your turn because it does have swiftness. But if your opponent is playing something like Death Scythe, like if they're playing Feat Sing and they're recurring Death Scythe constantly from their graveyard in order to feel their Guinevere, you can kind of punish them for that. Put back cards in their exile that are kind of dead later in the game. Because if they're removing their entire graveyard, there's going to be something in there that's not very useful for them to draw. So overall, a very strong card, a very powerful alternative win condition for control. This is kind of the first thing that really lets us shy away from black-blue, because I wasn't a huge fan of the Charlotte Resonator being a win con for control at the moment. I preferred stealth, but I understand in this meta stealth is probably a little bit too much of a gamble to be playing as your win condition, and we're kind of switching towards black-red-white from black-blue, so to have a black-red win condition in control is very valuable, and that's why I think this card's going to make the top 5 easily. Number 4, we have Alice's World of Madness. It's pretty self-explanatory. There's a couple decks that just get completely shut down by this. Even if they instantly destroy it, this card still comes down and will probably kill like 2 or 3 creatures against the decks that you want to be siding it in against. I don't think it's going to see a whole lot of main deck play, but I do think it's a very powerful side deck card. I think this really slows down the meta a little bit in terms of Wyber Turbo. And it's also not bad against the Prescia deck, specifically the Adam Brawley Drake version, because it makes it very hard for them to get off their Adam Brawleys. Pretty much any Adam Brawley deck that's going to be playing 1-drops that have 200 defense and sacking them off, this card is a house against. So if you can stick multiples, even better, you're taking Guinevere's off the table. But I definitely don't think it's the best card in the set. I don't think it's going to be main decked a lot, but I do think this card is a little bit too powerful to really not have on the list or in the top 5. That's why it gets our number 4 slot. Going on, we have Schrodinger's Observation. Deal 400 damage multiplied by X to a Resonator, you gain that much life, or deal 300 to a player, you gain that much life. This is kind of that late game house for control decks. This is what they want to be looking for when they're sitting on 10 mana twiddling their thumbs. The Resonator part, not as relevant, although it is nice to have this be a removal spell on top of it. For 4 or 5 mana, you kill pretty much anything in the game. The only problem is that if they sack off the creature, you don't gain the life, is I believe the final official word from the WJP. So be careful of doing that, especially if they have a Levitine. But it's nice to have like a quick life gain while also doing something relevant, kind of taking down your opponent. Pretty much pretty straightforward card. Not a whole lot else to say about this, but I do think it is strong enough to get the number 3 spot. So number 2 we have Divine Bird of Ataraxia. This is a card I didn't really think too much of when I first saw it, but seeing the meta as it has evolved, I can really understand why it's so good. This is something that most Prisia decks play, one, so that they can block other Prisia decks, because it is pretty much the only one-drop flyer in the game, kind of similar to how Vlad played Ruck when Bahamut was around. You know, you just need that one-drop flyer to block out their J-Ruler for a turn, try and stabilize a little bit, try and catch back up on board in stones. And then its inheritance is just draw a card. I've made fun of the inheritance key symbol when it came out a lot, because discarding cards to do things that isn't drawing cards isn't very useful. So for this card to be able to discard itself to draw a card, as well as draw a card when it leaves the field, very, very good, very, very versatile. You know, you generally don't want, like Alice's little scout for a while was considered too slow because you don't want to wait for it to die. This card, you don't have to wait for it to die, but you can. You know, the 100-100 body, totally irrelevant. If it was a 2-2, it wouldn't really matter. Anything that deals 100 damage deals 200 damage in the current format. But just a really solid card, something you need to be playing to, you know, kind of combat these Prisia decks. I've seen it in a few Featsing lists. Not a fan there. I feel like you should be playing Scout and Featsing, just because you're not lacking green creatures to sack off. You have a surplus of elf tokens that you could get rid of. I don't think you really want to be sacking this, so if you're playing Featsing, I'd suggest sticking to the Scouts over this. But for everything else, there's Divine Bird of Ataraxia. Which brings us to our number 1 card from the set. Drum roll, please. There's no drum roll. It's Unending Hatred. So you choose one. If you have a Fire and a Darkness J Resonator, you choose both. Probably not going to get to choose both a whole lot of the time, but it's not like it'll never happen. And you look at your opponent's hand, exile a card, so it's already better than Schemes of the Empire. That's the name of it. The Vingolf 2 card that says look at your opponent's hand. So exiling the card is first off extremely relevant. The second part is destroy all of your opponent's resonators with a total cost 1 or less, which is very good against Featsing, and Featsing was kind of the counter to hard discard decks. So for this card to have a mode that allows you to beat those decks is extremely relevant. Overall, just a super solid card. It does 2 extremely relevant things. It only costs 2 mana. It fills a slot that you were already playing in a better way. Just a phenomenal card. So that is going to be it from me. That is my top 10 for Return of the Dragon Emperor. Go ahead and comment, message me on Facebook, any of that. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to On Tilt Gaming. And until next time, I'm Aaron Miles.